Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review is brought to you in part by Rogers Hobby Center in Saginaw, Michigan, where the fun begins. This review covers the Ford GT Le Mans 2017 kit. It's a 1/24 scale unit from Revell, model number 85-4418. Now, I fashioned this build after Ford's number 68 GT car, which won the GTE Pro class in the 2016 Le Mans race. Ironically, it was exactly 50 years to the day after the newly designed Ford GT won the 1966 race. Now, this 2019 release is rated a skill level 4 for the experienced builder, and the kit has 88 pieces molded in white, clear, transparent red with water slide decals and instructions. Now, at half the price of the nearest competition, Revell gives you a full V6 engine, Tampo printed windows, a full roll cage, metal axles, and soft vinyl tires. When you're done, the finished dimensions are approximately 8 1/4 inches long, 4 inches wide, and 1 3/4 inches high. Here are the contents of the kit. As you can see, there's no really extra pieces, but the body has been designed to be a little more friendly for construction. And as you saw, you get some red taillights and Tampo printed windows, which takes the worry out of masking and painting them. We'll be using liquid cement for most of the construction, but we'll also use some crystal clear glue for the windows and some super glue for strength at certain places. But remember, follow the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when using any of the products that you see or hear in the review. Here are the decals for the kit. As you can see, they're colorful and the register is good. There are markings for all 4 of the vehicles, and so you can choose which one you want to apply or replicate. The first thing I do with the kit is go over the instructions. Then I identify the pieces that are all colored the same or painted the same color. Then I group them by color and spray them all at one time for each color. That makes it easier to put them together and makes for cleaner parts when you assemble the model. I started the construction by skipping ahead to step 3 and assembled the motor. Now, it's fairly well detailed, although it's very basic. There's not that many pieces. So go ahead and assemble the block transmission sections there and get that ready for the rest of the motor. Remember to scrape off any paint or plating for the parts you want to glue together for good adhesion. Now here you can see that the heads and the intakes have been added, as well as the front and the exhaust manifolds. Now here also the belts are added to the sides, front, and then it is almost ready for some extra detailing. And we're going to add some rust color to the exhaust pipes to give it a more realistic look. But here is the assembled engine and it's ready, so set it aside to dry. Right from the beginning, you'll be putting decals into position. There are some that go on the motor, which you can do at this time, or wait until you assemble it into the floor pan, which is the next step in construction. But there's some issues with the decals here. The yellow decals basically disappeared when placed over anything with a dark color behind it. So I ended up having to make replacements for that on my color printer. But overall, the interior is just gorgeous, and it just consists of a few pieces. The cover plate, the pedals, and the seat are all put into place and added to the interior for a really nice looking job. But unfortunately, if you leave the windows in your vehicle, you won't be able to see too much of it. Now we'll scrape some of the paint off of the locating point for the motor, and remember to do that to glue the engine into position at this time. And if you haven't done the decals yet, there's a couple that go on the engine too. So go ahead and put that engine into place and staged for the next section of construction. The floor pan fits into the position fairly closely, but go ahead and locate some glue points and scratch the paint off and glue the interior tub into the floor pan. You see here the floor pan prior to the tub being installed, and I wanted to show the sidewalls there of the roll cage because there's some structural components there, and we'll get to those later. But after we put the tub into place, we're going to place, as you see the white arrow here, the firewall right behind that into position now. You can see here some of the parting lines. They're a little bit oddly placed, but it's a convoluted shape for this model, so I guess you'd have to expect that. But go ahead and remove all the parting lines and smooth out any blemishes that you find on the model. And then we're going to give it a nice couple of medium coats of, I used Tamiya White Fine Primer to give it a good white coloration for part of the body actually. After the body has dried, we're going to give it a quick light sand and rinse it clean and air dry. And then we're going to tape off the section that we want to retain white. And you see the vertical oblique stripes there. That's on the white masking tape that comes from Tamiya for curves. So go ahead and tape this up and get it ready for the next color coat. Next, spray the main body color, a medium blue. This is a Krylon medium blue. And then you can go ahead and remove the tape and correct any minor errors on the white. It's pretty easy to do that with either just scraping off a little piece of extra blue there or painting it with a little flat white. The rear section of the vehicle and the lower rear roll pan were painted with some Krylon Banner Red for the red coloration there. So as you can see, the two body sections here, the complementary red, white, and blue colors are very striking when put together. So we're going to get ready now to mask off and paint the inner fender wells there, as they are also the same Banner Red color. So go ahead and do that at this time. Now we can do some of the flat black detailing, and for that I use the mixture of black craft paint and some liquid soap along with some water, usually in about equal parts, to paint the flat black portions on the car. The reason why I use that is because it fills everything and you can remove anything you don't want. So if you get some on some of the main car part of the body, then you just wipe it off. And if it doesn't look quite right, you just apply it and continue to do that until you get a satisfactory result. As you can see here in the last sections, even in the back end, it looks pretty good once you clean it up. So here's what we have at this point, and later on we're going to paint the insides of these, the roof and the inner fender wells, the door panels. They're black to make sure that they look appropriate if you do peek through the windows. Now we can do the majority of the body decaling, and I do recommend using some setting solutions like the microscale products to make sure that they nestle in, and they respond very well to that. First thing that we're going to use is the decals for the hood intakes there, the large intake divots, and they actually were just perfect. They fit exactly right. I did have to touch up a seam or two with a little flat white, or you can paint that with some craft paint too, either way. But I also had to make up some extra decals that weren't provided on the sheet to replicate that 2016 winter. Now you will notice that compared to the box art, some of these decals have been moved or rearranged, and I just used online photos of the 2016 number 68 winter to replicate that as closely as possible. And the two that I made, you can see the red arrow there is the powered by, which goes over the EcoBoost symbol. And by the way, the Ford emblem needs to be cut off on one side or the other of the model. The reason for that is because the Ford oval is in front of the EcoBoost script there on both sides of the vehicle. And you also see number 68 was moved from the door panel to the rear fender, which is the way it appeared on the real car. Now we'll take another look at those roll cage pieces, and we'll be using the parts here with the red arrows. The firewall is already installed, of course. So what we're going to do is glue the rails into position on the base platform, and they provide some structure for the vehicle actually. The one problem I had was on the right side. I couldn't get that tab in front there into the receiving hole, so I ended up having to cut it off and glue the whole thing down with some super glue. Also, it was a little bit warped. I noticed after I installed it, the one on the right side there. And so that gave me some problems with the roll cage fit later, which we'll discuss. But we'll also be putting that X cross plate in there, and that actually ties the tops of the roll cages together, but the glue points are very small, so you'll have to use some super glue and hold that into position until you get a good bond. This also provided a semi mock-up as I used the radiators there to position the roll cage. They actually fit on some pegs that come off of that cage. So additionally, I installed the exhaust tips there. They actually don't protrude through the vehicle, which I think would have made it for a nicer looking model. They just kind of point to the side exhaust ports there that are part of the body shell. Next, we'll scrape off the paint from the area that you locate the lower dashboard assembly section onto, to make sure that you get a good bond, and put that into position right there up front. Once I had applied the liquid cement to that, in order to get a good tight construction, I actually used a clamp, a plastic clamp on both sides, to clamp that down into position till it dried. Next, we can gather the pieces for the upper dash assembly and the column. And it also has a monitor screen there that goes on top, along with some really nice decals. And in order to get those decals to show up better, I went and scraped the paint off so that the white portions showed through the buttons, and that would permit them to reflect more of the decals colors. And you can see here, after the decals have been applied using some setting solution, that they look pretty realistic. And the colors now show through, so I think that's a good idea if you want to get some visual assistance there inside. Before we start getting into the rest of the roll cage, I'm going to go ahead and add some decals to replace those no-step yellow decals that I said basically disappeared. I printed those on some white decal paper, and then that gives it the opaqueness that you need in that location. So I went ahead and applied that to the no-step areas. Next, we're going to add the top roll cage bar, and it's kind of a strangely shaped piece, but there are some locating points for it on the roll cage and the firewall. Next, I'm going to super glue these pieces into place, starting with the net there that goes inside the cockpit, the safety net. And that fits into pieces on the back and the dashboard. There's a spot for it. And you can see the yellow tape here where those pieces were added, the top roll cage bar and the net. Next, we'll be adding the front suspension pieces. So those got painted, of course, according to the callouts. And the struts are aluminum. And they uniquely will be installed flat against portions on the frame and the roll cage. But before that, we'll add some decals to the calipers and get those ready for installation. Now you see here the lower strut is glued straight onto the lower pan, and get that flat and straight because that actually aligns the wheels, which is pretty unique. And you see here the hub, which goes into place, on the axle stub there. The next part's a little tricky, but it's actually a pretty good way compared to some of the other manufacturers on how to assemble these wheels. That hub there, if you use some slow setting glue on the backside to attach it to the body, you can rotate that so that you place the notch of the lower control arm into position on the bottom and glue that into place. And then you can put the upper control arm in against the body shell in its two mounting points, and then glue the finally the outside portion to the hub. There's a slot on the top and the bottom, and that aligns your wheels. So gather up these pieces, the intercoolers, the exhaust tips, the air intake lower section, and the roll cage piece, and we'll install those next. And here you see the frame piece there. Cage is installed on top of the rails, and the intercoolers are glued into position on the hubs that they fit onto, along with the exhaust, which are glued in now. You can even see the no-step decals up front that were placed there. Now there are three pieces here that are used to provide the air intake, the ducting, and we're going to install those at this time. And so if you notice the red, white, and blue arrows here, you can see the separate pieces. Of course, the white arrow is the outward portion of the duct, and that is going to stick up out of the top of the window that covers the engine. So make sure that that has the correct placement. I'll get the parts out for the rear suspension, and it's essentially installed the same way as the front, except that the two top mounting holes there, the blue arrows, are for the upper A-arm, and then the lower one, the red one, goes through a slot in the wheel boss there. So that will get glued again to the rail frame, but through that slot. And as you see here, this is all positioned properly, and just use a little slow glue on the main hub to position it with the A-arm extensions. The wheels are finally being molded in a way that the attachments don't protrude or have to remove any of the tire. Just make sure that you trim it off close to the inside edge there. And note too that the front wheel hubs have the longer stud on them there, so keep those separate for the front wheels. If you want a little more realism, go ahead and press and roll the tread area onto some flat fine sandpaper, about a 220 grit, to give it a scuffed up look, more realistic. Forget to add the decals to the exterior portion of the wheels and tires, but for right now I just use the axles and tires and wheels assemblies as mock-up items. As you can see here, it gives me an idea of whether we've got flatness, etc. And in the instructions you can put them in place now, but I waited actually until the last step to put the wheels into position finally. Now we're getting to the point where the kit is starting to come together, and don't forget that there are decals on the rear wing as well as the windshield and the corresponding color stripe for the car number that you build. You also see here a black Sharpie, a large one, and I notched that out to provide a black surround for those headlight glass covers. I'm not sure that it's needed, but it does have a nice look to it. Now the glass, of course, the lights are tinted with some clear yellow, and then the surrounding area of that is painted flat black. And in the back side of it, I've applied a little bare metal foil tape to give that some reflectivity. Not sure why they didn't use the tampo printing to put the surrounds on here. I think maybe it has something to do with the shape of the glass, but that would have been nice. But really it's just the seal that goes on. But as you can see, when installed here, as you could do now, it looks pretty nice. It looks like a real sealed area for that enclosure. Next, we're going to take the two halves of the body and mate those together. And there's some nice contact and glue points there, but also note that those tangs, the forward sections of it, kind of wrap underneath and behind the inside of the body there. Now the black arrow indicates where the forward mounting point is. Scrape off the paint there to get a good bond. And also in the back end, black arrows will indicate a couple of tabs that the rear section fits under. Fit that in there snugly and glue it into place with some super glue. So now you'll have an assembled body shell, and it fits. It's actually pretty sturdy when it's glued together in this fashion, kind of wraps around itself. And notice on the rear fenders, there's a black patch, an intake there that I wish they had supplied a decal for, but you'll have to paint that flat black for realism. Scrape off the glue from this ridge and go ahead and mount the rear lower pan there into place. And then we're going to paint the interior of the roof and the sidewalls there a flat black, like the race car. So she's coming together nicely now. Using some white glue or some of the micro scale crystal clear product, go ahead and install the windows now. And they just drop in from the outside. They're very nicely designed. But you'll also find that you really don't need to put the side windows in, because if you want to leave them off for display, you can, or you can just pop them back in for that. Now, white arrows indicate where the glass is located. It's time to mate the body shell to the lower section, and this is the most challenging portion, because the roll cage, if it's out of position at all, will prevent some of that from happening correctly. Also note this little gap here. That's that intake in the back, and you'll have to make sure that that is sticking up there, and once you wiggle it into position, that it's proportionate and symmetrical. So as you can see, your goal is to get the black arrow there and shows you where the front end glues together tightly in front against the body shell. Use some super glue, as well as along the rear, the whole sides there too. The black arrows indicate proper position. So put that together with some thin super glue to make sure it stays closed. The mirrors have an unusual paint scheme. The top portion is red, but the rest of it is black. So I sprayed the whole top portion, and then I masked it off and painted semi-gloss black on the bottom and the mounting stem. After the paint dried on the mirrors, I added just a drop of the Molotow chrome pen into it for a mirror face. It would have been nice had Revell added some mylar or something to place in there. With the body together now, we can add the last decals, and that's the stripe that goes across both the front and the back sections. Now this stripe comes down around the outside edge, and it kind of straddles the exhaust ports too. So I cut it off just above where it says GT, and then I put the stripes on separately with some setting solution, and they fit right into place. The small gap there at the edge is easily covered with a little flat white paint. Next, we can put the final pieces into place. I always like to wait to the last to put in things that can break off easily through handling. Now, the upright struts there for the rear airfoil go into place over the bumper. There's some slots there, and pleasantly surprised. They're nice gluing and mounting points for this, so it's fairly sturdy and aligned properly. Then go ahead and glue the mirrors into place along with the red tail lights, and your construction is complete after you install the tires and wheels with the axles. Well, there you have it. From any angle, this stunning race car in the red, white, and blue livery is a real head turner, and it's a little bit difficult in some spots, but if you pay close attention to the review, you'll find that you can overcome any of those issues and come up with a really beautiful car model for your display shelf. There are a lot of decals, and of course alignment is always an issue with those. And the frame rail that was twisted a little bit there needs to be straightened out really before you assemble the model. I had to force it back into position after it was glued in. One body difference that I did notice, and I really couldn't get around it because of the decal, was that dome on top of the roof. It does not appear on the 2016 car, but I needed to keep it there. So that's something for the aficionados to fix, I guess. But this great model is available now, and if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step scale model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the icon in the lower right hand of any of the reviews. You can also find us on Facebook and at our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.